Hi. So I have completed the Section 7 Intermediate Bootstrap of this course called the Complete 2022 Web Development Bootcamp. And before I move forward to Section 8, I would like to quickly summarize what I have learned so far. And basically, it's just continuation of Bootstrap, how to use other components um, such as the Bootstrap carousel. For me, there's nothing new on how this is being used. You just have to understand the documents, copy the code, and just use what you need for your website. So for this case, for the Bootstrap carousel, let's look at that in our index.html. So here at the testimonials page, we designed it to be a carousel as for our example here. On this testimonials page, this is a carousel. So this div is for the contents, and these two buttons are the previous and the next buttons. So it's as simple as that. This is nothing new. We just place the carousel items and place the buttons and whatever images or text you need to place there. And it's the same, just design it with your own CSS styles. So other thing than that, we also use cards for the pricings page, I believe. Yeah, here we use the cards for the pricing. And it's the same. There's nothing new. Just go to Bootstrap, copy the code, and design it for your own purpose. What's significant in this section was the CSS-Z index, where it's simply just positioning your CSS elements, basically arranging them which should be on top and which should be below the image. For our website here, we wanted this image, this iPhone image, to be behind this section. So there are simple rules that was discussed to us, and there was this PDF file that helped us to understand those rules. But to simplify, it's just that without Z index defined, it will simply follow the HTML rules of, let's say, stacking of elements. So basically, a child element will always be on top of the parent element. What else? And the next one is an element below will always be on top. So for this case, they say the section with an ID features will always be on top of the section ID title if they are in the same sequence. See? And testimonials will be on top. But on top of the section, on top of this, for example, features, container fluid will be on top. Now, this changes if you already apply Z index. So Z index can only be used if you have defined a position. It could be relative. It could be absolute. And if I'm not mistaken, fixed. Yeah, you could set it as fixed, but not static. Static means there's no defined position. And then once you define a position, you can now use the Z index. By default, Z index is 0. So with those rules, we can actually let your images be on top or below, on or under other elements. So these are the rules. Which one is on top? When there is already a position, it those with Z index, since if you define a position, if you define an element to have a position, well then it will have a Z index of 0 by default. Of course, if you compare one element with Z index, the one higher Z index will be on top. The one lower will be below, regardless of their positive or negative signs. As long as it's higher, then it will be on top. If what else? If one have a Z index, the element with a Z index greater than 0 is on top. Of course, because Z index works if you have a position of relative, and by default it's 0, and then the one with greater than 0 will be on top. So I just summarized this part a while ago. So aside from that, if there's no defined Z index, if you don't have a position defined, the rules that I mentioned below will be followed. All right. So for this case, since I wanted to place this iPhone behind these features, let's go to my CSS styles. I wanted to use Z index for both this class, iPhone rotate, which is being used by this iPhone image, and to the feature section where I wanted to hide my iPhone behind it. First, I indicated the background color to be white so that it will be significant. If you could see that it's behind. And then I defined both to have a position relative, so Z index will be applied. And then by default, the Z index will be 0. Since they're equal, what will be followed? Of course, since they're already at the same position relative to the Z index, it will follow the HTML stacking rules, which is the one below will always be on top, the top element. So that's how I created this positioning. It doesn't matter if I define Z index 0 or 1, Z index 0 or -1, it will be the same. Yep. Oh, no, Z index -1 affects all of these elements. So it should only be 0. But I don't need to indicate that since by default it's 0. Yep, I can do this. Yeah, so that's for the Z index. The next topic, which was explained, was the media query breakpoint, or just the media query. It's simply a code, I can say, that enables us to find the breakpoint, for our case, we indicated a max width of 1028 pixels, meaning the screen size or the viewport. And then when I hit the max width of 1028, my title will be center aligned and my image will have this CSS positioning defined. It will go back to its original rotation. Yeah, that will happen. Okay, max width. There. Since it's no longer 1028, we'll decide. So that's it. Uh, what else? Yeah, you could also use this if uh, the media query for if you are in the print mode. I think there's a command there. You can change the preview. You can change the preview here. You can change the CSS. You have the print view. Next was discussed is the code refactoring. It's basically simplifying or making your code more readable, more modular, more efficient, and maybe shorter. So there are many ways, but I think the most significant way that was discussed was to combine HTML elements and using combinators selectors. Um, Only two was discussed. It's just combining selectors by having selector space selector and the one with no space. It was discussed on the difference. Um, the one with no space just says that if I have selector 1 and selector 2 within the same element, then I will give this kind of CSS properties. The other one, the other selector is just defining the hierarchy. For example, selector 1 space selector 2 means that if the selector 2 exists in the selector 1 inside that element, then we apply this CSS properties. So there are still a lot of selector combinators that I have found here in WT School. I just read them a while ago and it's really helpful. And to be honest, I've already used some of them. Where is that? Combinators, CSS, where's that? Is it one of the basics? Yeah, it's basics, not medium advanced. I think. Combination. One. Here. That descendant. Yeah, descendant is what we've used a while ago. Child selector specifies the child element. Like if P exists in div, then apply this background color. Adjacent. Yep. What's this? directly after another specified element. If div1 is under, if p is under div, then apply this. This general sibling, if it's like adjacent, but it selects all the elements that is in parallel with it and below it. Yeah, div p. The paragraph 3, paragraph 4. Even though it has a code here, it also selects it. I think it's very helpful, especially this one. Element. This one, element space element, selects everything, even though, for example, the P is inside another element under div. But this is very specific. It does not select the P inside another element under div. So thank you. That's quick. And I'll explain the next section once I've completed it. Thank you.